My buddy Corey and I just put out a video about why action movies seem so boring nowadays. Yeah, they've got all the special effects and cool action scenes, but it's mostly just the same old super cop slop. Boring heroes with boring motivations reflect the status quo. We're not supposed to want change. We're supposed to want everything to stay the same. We're told not to try to improve anything. That would lead to chaos. Just let the authorities react to every crisis how they see fit and go back to consuming Marvel content. I think it's important to be polite and respectful to everyone by default, until they show you that they don't deserve your respect. But to me, at least, respecting people and respecting their beliefs are not the same thing. It's too bad people tend to identify with their beliefs, so if I challenge them, even accidentally, they get defensive. But if you aren't willing to change your beliefs in the face of facts, you have to work even harder to stay ignorant. It takes effort to deny evidence and suppress that questioning voice inside or outside and bring you back to boring, liberal, conservative, centrist, moderate status quo politics. This thinking cannot solve today's problems. Only radical approaches can, and that's why most people never learn about them. This channel is made possible by your purchases from my merch store. The only thing left at this point is this special It Had to Be Said razor, so you can be as bald as me. If you really want to support this channel, you'll shave your head. At university, reading political science conditioned me to think there were only two ways to get anything done collectively: the state and the market. Those are the only two legal spaces where we're allowed to make change, the two spaces that best reinforce the status quo. There's also the non-profit sector, but it depends on the state and the market and sort of becomes an extension of them. Those of us who were more right-wing tended to believe the market should do everything, with a small role for government, while those on the left seemed to think the state should do everything that mattered, and the private sector could take care of the rest. Every time there was a crisis or something, the obvious answers were filtered through those assumptions. Not enough private sector, not enough government. Too much private sector, too much government. And because they don't agree on basic principles, people will continue to argue over these points until they realize it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter because you don't get to decide those things. And there's no one you can vote for who will govern the way you want them to. We learn to argue that someone should take power. So we say we want to vote for Party A because Party A promised to make housing affordable and take care of the poor. But they don't do that even if they want to. The system doesn't let them. I get bored in discussions about what the government should or is supposed to do when it has no relation to what the government can and will do. We're taught the government is supposed to work for us, so all our beliefs about it flow from that premise. But as I explain in 200 videos, it isn't supposed to work for us, it doesn't work for us, and you can figure that out through observation. The problem is, belief gets in the way of observation. So not only do we believe ideology over the evidence of our own eyes, ideology restricts our thinking and our imaginations about what's possible. When I say your politics are boring, you might just not be aware there are alternatives to the way things are. And I don't just mean lower taxes and better public services. I mean liberation. I think liberation is more exciting than politics. So, how do you know if your politics are boring? Do you have an unchanging worldview about what politics is, where power lies, how it's exercised, and what holds it back? If you don't learn anything about how politics works after you learn about it in school, you might have this fixed idea about something really complex and always changing. That's probably why it's so hard for Americans to wrap their heads around what's happening now. They don't like Trump or Elon, but they think what those guys are doing is temporary. They think in 4 years they'll be able to go back to normal. They say Democrats should be standing up to the government when they're aiding and legitimizing it. They think courts can stop the government because that's one of those checks and balances. The Supreme Court voted unanimously 9-0 that the government had to facilitate the return of Kilmar Abrego Garcia. Simon Sandoval Moschenberg, a lawyer for Abrego Garcia, hailed the court's ruling, saying the rule of law prevailed. But where's Kilmar? How did the government respond? They pretended the court ruled 9-0 in their favor. They said the opposite of what happened and just continued on. You can't stop these people with facts. And everyone's like, this is a breakdown of democracy and the rule of law, but they don't get the implications of it. Yes, it's broken. It's in a million tiny pieces and the pieces are being swept away. In fact, it's fair to say at this point, the Trump government has to destroy the rule of law. They've gone so far beyond any semblance of legality, they have to completely co-opt the legal system for any of them to avoid prison. These are the people making the laws now. It's time to stop believing the state is neutral and the law makes things right or wrong. After all, it's not just Trump who makes laws. You can be sure wherever you live, there are laws you disagree with, made by people you don't trust, working for themselves to enrich their friends. Yet when they write something down and vote on the words, those words are now enforced at the point of a gun. And people will make excuses for why it's right. It doesn't matter what I believe, they might say, it's the law. So what you believe is it's inherently correct to follow the law. But do you really think that? Or do you just not want to think too much about it? Do you agree with Martin Luther King when he agreed with St. Augustine, who said an unjust law is no law at all? He wasn't talking about traffic laws. Should you have to sit at a separate lunch counter because somebody says so? Or because they wrote it down? Should you be separated from your family because you were born somewhere else? Should you be forced to detransition to avoid imprisonment? Why can't we defend ourselves against agents of the state? What would you do if they were going to kill someone over a traffic violation? Just stand back and gape in horror? What if they were trying to kidnap and traffic you to El Salvador, where you might be enslaved or killed? Just get on the plane? Because that's where the belief in state supremacy leads. And these are questions that are relevant now, while state agents kill and abduct people every day. But boring beliefs don't question state supremacy. They don't question the distribution of wealth and power, or at least not the systems that maintain this inequality, like capitalism and the state. So they might say, no one should be poor, in theory, but if a poor person steals from a supermarket, well, that's illegal, and the law's the law, and they deserve to be punished. We can usually question the people in the seats of power and their words, but we don't always question the institutions themselves, why they exist, who they serve. Everyone I know around the world was taught to repeat to themselves for the rest of their lives whenever something bad happens, my country is fundamentally good, just temporarily lost its way. The wrong people are in the seats, so we need someone else with the same powers and incentives to do things differently. What if there were no seats of power? How would we solve problems if we didn't have to accept whatever the state imposed on us? What's standing in the way of implementing those solutions? Why do we never ask these questions? People like satire as a way of questioning power. But what are its effects? As much as they want to criticize, comedians often reinforce all our beliefs about the system and keep us complacent. The late-night talk show hosts are funny, but they might just channel our anger into mockery while burnishing the image of the powerful. We're vicariously saying, "Take that, Trump!" and then going to bed. Is this really a time for complacency? Or should we be turning our anger into action? Do you know what's going on? If you're in the US, you could be out there stopping it. You could be protecting migrants and trans people and homeless people, standing in the way of ICE traffickers and cops, freeing people, even stopping the genocide of Palestinians. But millions of people are at home waiting for something to change. People want change. They've always wanted change. We don't all want to make the change ourselves, but no one's truly happy with the way things are. But what most people do will never lead to change. They support and identify with the state, which exists to prevent change, in the belief it's the only legitimate way to change anything. We put our hope in politicians, because politicians are the one aspect of the state we have some measure of power over. But politicians can't change things, at least not for the better, because the system belongs to the people with all the money, not to politicians. The people who own everything would never risk putting real power in the hands of their spokespeople. I think most people can observe that. And yet, some people spend half their waking lives trying to get people elected, or tweak the electoral system, or just argue fruitlessly with other people about it. You can't vote on policy. You vote for people you judge will pass policies you don't hate as much as those of the other candidates. Or you might even vote strategically, which is a way of saying don't vote for who you want because they have no chance of winning. So it's realistic to have minimal expectations and goals for this system, like making tiny changes and getting slightly better people in the seats. That's the best this system can do. But it's not the best we can do. If we wanted the best society, presumably we would have more people involved in creating it. Because if we wanted a society for everyone, where everyone's needs were met, where people could be free to express themselves, we would need everyone's input, or we would risk leaving some people out. But one feature of political beliefs is they don't tend to allow for any others. The state imposes one social system with one set of morals on everyone, instead of leaving room for people to experiment with different ways of living and doing things. Political beliefs tend to require a small group to make the decisions for everyone else. Instead of having the freedom to decide things for ourselves with all the possibilities that could mean, we conform to the one legal way of doing things and the one correct way to think about things. Beliefs that leave no room for others close the mind. There are so many people out there to who I suggest we work toward our collective liberation, and they laugh and say that's silly. We should just do something realistic, like vote and expect nothing to change. If the idea of freedom is forever lost on you, then philosophy is dead. Because a big part of philosophy concerned human freedom. If the very prospect is out of the question, nothing can ever get better. Ends and means become the same thing. The goal is no longer liberation, but to get someone elected. When the goal is winning elections, it's easy to lose sight of any reason why you should win. You don't care what the party is actually offering, just that people think they should vote for it. That's how you get these rich old Democrats saying to get elected, their party should go even more right-wing, because A, that's where the money is, and B, that's where these people's social circles are, because they're rich, old, out-of-touch Democrats too. These are the people who smear student protests as anti-Semitic and anti-fascist action as violent, because any tactics other than working through the system warrant punishment. They seem to be on this quest to get the mythic centrist vote that you get by throwing trans kids and Palestinians under the bus. They want to attract people who have no principles and just do as the system tells them to. But the day-to-day arguments in Congress and official spokespeople's words and future elections are a pretty small part of what's going on. That's what the news calls politics, but that's not really where power lies. We don't know what decisions are being made in boardrooms around the world. All responsibility gets heaped on politicians. So we ask politicians to do stuff for us when they either don't have the power to do it or it wouldn't be in their interest. They don't have to do what we want. They can just ignore us and distract us with parliamentary debate. So our understanding about how power works is filtered through this system and reaches us in the form of news about what was said in Parliament. Then how did the other guy respond? What does it mean? Who voted for what? Why certain people might vote a certain way, etc., 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 instead of what these people have actually done for us. So of course your politics are boring. It's not you. It's politics. Boring beliefs only know of one or a limited number of solutions. When I say you shouldn't have faith in the Democratic Party because they're not going to save you, people tell me I must want violent revolution, because it's either a complete revolution or keep trying at this electoralism thing forever. But that's a false dichotomy. I'll probably make a video about it for my False Dichotomies playlist. But you can make things better yourself. You don't need to work through a party that might not represent you. You don't need to wait for the polls to show that the actions you're considering taking are popular. Acting outside the state and the market is never popular. Doing what needs to be done to stop authoritarianism is never popular, at least Not until about 20 years later, when the people who were calling you communists and saying you should be shot claim they always supported the cause. Boring beliefs are usually shared by other people who haven't reconsidered them either. After all, until we learn to question them, we acquire most of our beliefs from parents, school, and media. Naturally, we grow up to support parties that talk about the stuff we were told we believe in. Once we get on social media, our beliefs could change like mine did because we get exposed to different points of view. Yet many people use their time on social media to bolster their old beliefs. We hear YouTubers and so on talking about country and tradition and crime and other words we've been taught to feel a certain way about. They don't want us to question what we learned either. They can turn it into bigotry and make money off people who don't know any better. There are all kinds of problems with social media and the way it works, and some people have gone so far as to say social media has been a curse. I feel bad for people who use social media to advertise and reconfirm their views. Because there are people trying to tell them they're wrong, trying to teach them, and they say, "No, I'm not letting the devil teach me anything today." They know that to question your core beliefs is to risk losing a part of yourself. They've reached a point in their lives where they don't want to learn anything anymore. Just maintain this unsteady balance of static beliefs in the face of a changing world. But where did they get those beliefs? They're just the beliefs authority taught them. Why are they so sure they're right? Because that's what they've decided. They don't want new ideas except to reinforce their old ideas. Boring beliefs think they've found the truth, so they're not curious anymore. It's a kind of mental comfort some people will fight to the death to preserve. I use social media first and foremost to learn. To me, sites like YouTube and Blue Sky are some of the best repositories of different perspectives that I'm aware of. So I follow people who talk about what I'm interested in, who seem to know what they're talking about, which I have some measure of judgment about because I've learned something about these subjects already. You can often judge a poster's integrity because if they're wrong or lying, there's a good chance someone in the comments will point it out to them, and you can see how they respond to it. Every day I learn from multiple points of view on what's happening. I hear about things the news doesn't talk about. And I get book and movie and YouTube channel recommendations. But maybe I'm just more curious than most. Currently, the most boring argument making its rounds online is, if you didn't vote for the Democratic Party, you're responsible for everything Trump is doing. I hear it every day. This is clearly a self-serving, self-righteous argument that people who vote Democrat tell themselves to wash their hands of any further responsibility. They think they've done their part by casting one vote. If others are to blame, you can feel innocent and vindicated. And it's great for them because they'll have the rest of their lives to blame everyone else. Because no liberal party is ever going to take power in the US again. So repeating the lines about whose fault this all is will be their way of comforting themselves as people around them get shoved into unmarked vans and disappeared to a Central American gulag. Because their words satisfy their consciences, I suspect these are the people least likely to try to make things better. They seem to think everything begins and ends with the state, so if you want things to get better, you have to vote and call your congressperson. Well, I've watched people vote and write and call for decades, and nothing has ever got better as a result of it. But I have seen things improve. When people form organizations that actually do something, like helping homeless people, making and delivering food to the poor, providing free clinics, starting community gardens, or just organizing community events, things have a chance of getting better. Any and all of these things will have an effect. Endlessly justifying your inaction will not. Convenient, moderate political beliefs do not equip a person to deal with the end of liberalism and the beginning of a period of right-wing authoritarian rule that will ruin countless lives. Most people will continue to believe in liberalism after it's been destroyed, as if by voting hard enough you can make it come back. They're desperate for normal, when things were easier to deal with, so we didn't deal with them. When problems bubbling under the surface had not yet boiled over. Well, now they have. You can adapt, or you can live in the past, or some other fantasy world, like right-wing conspiracy world, or planet everything's gonna be okay. If you tell yourself something couldn't happen, that the threat couldn't be as bad as they say it is, you might be choosing not to deal with reality. You might be trying to warp reality to fit around your beliefs. There's a certain amount of self-interest that goes into justifying our beliefs. You can see why people might not want to change how they think. If we're going to work for a corporation or the state, we want to tell ourselves our contribution is doing some good. Even if what we're doing is hurting people and the environment, it's still somehow good. Good for the country, good for the economy, the GDP, creating jobs and stuff, better in the long term. The excuses are all there for us to use. Anyway, who cares? We got bills to pay. The excuses protect us from the discomfort we feel when we don't refuse and resist and fight back when we know we should. You might want to think about where your beliefs come from, and why institutions like the school and the media have an interest in making us think this way. Because when we aren't mindful of what we think and why, we accept the language of the dominant social institutions. Then we use that language to justify their actions. Pretty soon, people think the same. Not because we all reached the correct conclusion independently, but because we don't realize you can question what you were taught. That's the only world we know. So however bad it gets, the alternative could only be worse. Because boring politics don't imagine and work toward a new world. Boring politics want more of the old world, so they oppose change. Working through the political system kind of assumes it's not really possible to make things better, or that things could get better gradually at a snail's pace while we hurtle toward environmental and social collapse. When is it time to fight back? Things are going to get worse for almost everyone either way. At least by putting up a fight, we have a chance of a better world in the future. And through mutual aid, we can make our small corner of the world better in the present. To change fixed beliefs requires learning. Before you can learn, however, you need to realize you know nothing. It might seem weird, but I speak from experience. Until you admit to yourself you know nothing, you won't learn. You'll only reinforce your preconceived notions, because that's all you know. They provide an inaccurate but complete worldview. If you assume all that is true, you won't learn beyond it. And there's a whole world beyond it. I suggest getting involved in local and global anti-politics. You know, getting stuff done, as opposed to putting your faith in the system. I've made some suggestions throughout the video and lots of other videos, so, subscribe. But think of it like they told you to think of a job search. Look at your interests, skills, and experience and see if there's anything going on where they intersect. What groups are operating near you? What could you do online? The point is, if you get involved with people doing useful things, you'll see results. The more people join in boycotts of Tesla, the more it hurts Elon. The more people provide sanctuary to migrants and stand in the way of ICE agents, the fewer people ICE will be able to kidnap. The more people educate their kids outside the state, the less power it has to indoctrinate them. You might be just one person, but enough people working together can topple any structure. And if we fail, we'll leave behind resilient communities, critical thinking, joy, courage, and an unquenchable thirst for freedom. Thanks.